Today we're going to talk about the midpoint of a segment. But you can see here now that we have a warm-up. So why don't you put it on pause and try the warm-up, and then I'll go over it with you. All right, how did you do on it? So this uses segment addition. It says if QR, so this segment from here over to here, if it equals 58, so I'm going to put 58 right here on that segment, and PQ is 13, so I'm going to put that right underneath PQ, and it wants us to find the length of PR, which is the whole thing. Well, because of the segment addition postulate, I know that PQ, oh, that's a 3, plus QR, which is 58, would have to equal the whole segment PR. So PR would have to equal 71. And you could say 71 units because they didn't tell you whether it was inches or feet or what have you. So let's take a look at the second one. This one's a little trickier because now they're not just using numbers, but now they say that PQ, so let's go back up and look at our segment. Let's erase what we have here. So it says PQ is x minus 5. So let's write that in. Again, right on your diagram. It's always a good idea to write it in right on your diagram. So PQ is x minus 5. And QR is 2x minus 1. And they tell us that PR, this whole segment here, is equal to 21. So now we can write an equation, right? We know that PQ plus QR has to equal PR. And now we just substitute what we know. We know that PQ is x minus 5 plus, well, QR we know is 2x minus 1. And we know that has to equal PR, and they told us that PR was 21. So now we have here an algebraic equation, which we learned how to solve in Algebra 1. We will combine our like terms. So x and 2x are like terms, so we can combine those together to get 3x. And we can combine our like terms, -5 and -1. Remember to take the sign with it, so it's -5 and -1. And when we add two negative numbers, we're going to keep the sign and add them together. And that now is going to equal 21. Well, once again, we want to get the term with the variable alone, so we're going to add 6 to both sides. And if I add this together, this will be 3x. These will add to 0, and that will be 27. And I still want to get x alone. I'm multiplying between the 3 and the x. So to undo multiplication, I have to divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3, and I get x equals 9. And that's what they told me. So my answer here is x equals 9. All right, terrific. All right, well, let's go on and talk about the midpoint, which is what we're going to be talking about in this new lesson. So we're going to talk about the midpoint of a segment. So again, fill in your notes as you go along. The midpoint of a segment is a point that divides the segment into two equal pieces or two equal segments. So you see this point B here breaks segment AC into two equal pieces, and you know that those pieces are equal because you have those tick marks. And you remember those little tick marks show you that segment AB is congruent to segment BC. So a line, ray, or segment that intersects a segment at its midpoint is said to bisect. bisect, bisect the segment, and it's called the segment bisector. So in the diagram to the left, I'll make sure we can still see the diagram. On the diagram to the left, point B is the midpoint of segment AC, the segment sign, and line L, right, because I'm going to designate the line by that cursive L, is the segment bisector of AC. Okay. Well, now that we know how to talk about how to break a segment into two equal points or two equal segments, let's find out how do we find the midpoint. And you have something called the midpoint formula. So the midpoint formula, so the midpoint, and we'll say xm, so the midpoint x or ym equals, and this is actually a point, so it's going to give you an x and a y value. It's not going to give you just one value, it's going to give you an x and y value. So all you do is you take the two x values, so x1 plus x2, and you're going to divide that by 2, which makes sense because you're going to take the two segments and average them. That's how you find the middle of two things. And then you're going to put a comma because that will be your first coordinate pair. And then y1 plus y2, and you're going to divide that by 2. And that's how you're going to find your midpoint. So let's go ahead and try one of these and see how you do. All right. If Q is the midpoint of PR, so anytime I am doing something in geometry and they give me some information about a diagram, I always go ahead and put my notation right on my diagram. So I'm going to say that these two are congruent by putting those little tick marks there. So now I know that Q is the midpoint of PR, which tells me that PQ and QR have to be the same length. And they want to find the value of X. Well, if PQ and QR are the same length, then of course their lengths would have to equal each other. So I could just say 7x minus 16 equals 4x plus 2. And now once again, I have an algebraic equation that I can now solve. So once again, I can either combine the x's together first or the numbers together first. I tend to do the x's. So I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. I'm going to run into the other one, but you can probably see what's going on. So 7x minus 4x will be 3x. I'm still going to have this minus 16 here. That's going to equal, well, my 4x minus 4x will go to 0, so I can just cancel those out, and that'll equal 2. Now, I still want to get x alone, so I'm going to have to add 16 to both sides. And now on this side, I'll have 3x. Again, negative 16 plus 16 is 0, and then this will equal 18. And I'm multiplying between the 3 and the x, so I undo multiplication by division. 3 divided by 3 will just be 1, so I have x equals 6. All right, go ahead and try the rest yourself and let me know if you have any questions.